Hey, this is Mr. Andrew, and I'm going to show you today some of the very basics of sort of learning to draw in a way that makes your drawings much more proportionally accurate and successful. That your sizing is better, you're within the frame that you're working for, and I think that's a crucial step because that will give you more confidence coming into art class moving forward. If you struggle with simple sketching, it's hard to feel confident moving forward to more detailed sketches or moving forward into things like painting and sculpting because it's hard to envision if you have difficulty getting your ideas down on paper. So we're going to start here right off the bat. I have a paper, just a ruler, which you may or may not need. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Just a pencil, decent eraser on there. But the most important thing that we have here is actually the picture that we have here, and today we're going to be transferring this picture of an elephant onto this drawing. Now, one of the things that students are responsible for in this class for this semester is to keep a sketchbook, an ongoing sketchbook for your practice work, and something I will continue to sort of suggest along the way is to make sure that you are looking for pictures that will help you along the way, and pictures that you can draw on and print out so that you can write on them. If somebody asked you to draw a picture of an elephant, unless you had a near perfect memory, it would be very difficult to draw it on paper without tons and tons of practice and have everything proportionally accurate, your size is accurate within the paper frame that you're working for, unless you had a picture that you're looking at. So I would strongly suggest throughout the semester, anytime an idea pops into your head of something that you want to create, first go to your iPad or your phone or computer or something and find an image of something that looks similar to what you want to work with and print that out. And actually print it out on paper. Don't just look at it on your iPad. Print it out because you want to be actually able to draw on this. You want to work on it along the way, and I'll show you what that is. Okay. Now, so let's start. The first thing that we need to think about when we're going forward is the actual size of the page that we're working with. So we have this yellow page here, but the actual frame of the picture is this, right? Is this part here. Now, when we look at this picture, we can see right away that it's a rectangle, but it's much longer than it is taller. So it gives us the idea that this is like the style of a widescreen, like if you went to a movie theater. Now, if we look at the picture that we're trying to transfer it to, we realize that the proportions are not the same. It's certainly a rectangle, but the sides are much higher in comparison to the lengthwise size. So we need to sort of make some adjustments right off the bat so that we can make sure that we transfer this successfully using the right size of paper. So what we want to do first is make this essentially a widescreen page to work on. That way we know we're working on our same page size. So the first thing we're going to do is actually take the bottom, and you can just freehand this or take off the bottom quarter or so, and we're just going to get rid of it. We'll cut that off later. We don't need that. We just want to make sure that our paper size is similar, and this will be helpful to us as we transfer our shape over as accurately as possible. Okay. Once we've taken that off, and you could use your ruler to make a straight line if you want to, but we're just trying to get close today with our drawing. Now, before we move over here, we're going to start by doing some markups on this. We want to prepare this picture so we can more accurately transfer it over. And we first need to basically figure out where our halfway points are along the sides. Okay, so each picture frame will have, that you're working with will have 4 sides wherever they are. And for each one, I want you to figure out where is the halfway point. You can kind of eyeball it if you have good eyeballing skills. My halfway point is probably there. We're going to mark it off. Very similar. Going to be something like that. Or if you don't think that's a good skill that you might have, you could use a ruler. Try to judge it out. This is 19 centimeters across, so the midway point is 9.5. So I'm almost perfect there. I got I got lucky, but I've been doing this a long time. Now, I want you to continue to do that with your other sides as well. Okay? Now, once you have your 4 halfway points, I want you to add in your quarter points, which are basically halfway of the halfway. So there's a quarter point. Halfway between here and here is there. And mark these off. And what we are creating is essentially a grid that will help us to more accurately position our work. And what you're going to do is actually create a dot to dot. Okay, we're going to create a dot to dot and transfer it over. And we've all done dot to dot since we were kids. And the way that we transfer it properly is essentially to create a. We're going to play the game Battleship to do this. Okay, so in a battleship you need a grid, and that's what we need here too. So now that we've done this on this page, we've figured out our halfway points as well as our quarter points. Here, we're going to transfer them over onto our page as well. Okay, so now where is the center point of this line, which is the bottom of my frame now because I took this off? Where's the center point? Somewhere probably around here. Again, I could use my ruler if I wanted to figure out where the exact halfway point is, but I'm fairly good at guessing. You do want to be quite accurate because if you're not, it can throw your work off considerably, and then that becomes definitely a struggle. Now that we have our halfway points, I'm going to create the quarter points along the way here. Again, I'm kind of eyeballing these, but I can get pretty close. These points on our paper, because we're just using pencil here, we'll just erase them later. We don't need them to stay on. We don't want them on our final copy, but we can erase them a little bit later. That one can fix up that one just a little bit. Right? Now we're going to go, now that we have our grid sort of set up on this page and our paper here, we're going to go back to this page and start to mark it up a little bit to prepare to transfer it over. The first thing that we need to do is, essentially the next step is to turn this picture into a very simple 4-sided shape. And we figure out our 4 corners by figuring out where our extreme points are. So, for example, we're looking for the highest point, the lowest point, and the furthest point over here and over here. Okay? The highest point on this picture is very clearly the tip of this ear right here. So we're going to make a point right there. Okay? The furthest point over to this side will be the tip of the ear here. And the furthest point down, it looks like the legs are actually kind of in line, but if you line up your pencil to get the best sense, you'll see that lowest point is actually here in the front foot, at the bottom of the front foot. And then the furthest point this way, we can line up our pencil going straight across, and we'll see that the furthest point to the left is actually here, which is the back of the ankle. So we've created, with these 4 points, we've created a very basic 4-sided shape if we were to connect them. And this keeps our elephant within this relative shape compared to the rest of the page. Now we're only doing the elephant right now because this is what we call our main subject that we're interested in doing right now. The background we can add in later if we want to keep that. But this is our subject. Because this is what we're working with. This is our subject. We call this positive space. Everything else around it, the background, we call this negative space, and we'll talk about that later in this semester. So these 4 points that we have now, we're going to transfer these now onto our main page that we're working with, and we're going to do that by, again, using this grid system that we've created. Okay, so let's start with this top one here. This top point. This point, if we look at it in reference to the points that we just made, if this is our middle point, it's over just a little bit and down just a little bit. So if we're over here, kind of have to eyeball where you're within that space and bring it down. So I can make a mark there. It doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's pretty close. We can make adjustments as we go. Now the next one is down here. So where are we? Here's our quarter point over here. It's just below that, and it's a little ways past this, about a quarter ways past this, up here. And then, so if we bring this up, where's this going to connect to? Probably around there. And we'll do the same thing over here. There's our quarter point here, so we're on this side of the quarter point, a little ways, and we're probably about there, relatively close to there. Now, this one up here is on this side of this point, and here, so we're looking probably, it's going to be, oh, I forgot to do the quarter points on this one. So here's a quarter point, it's going to be up here and close to there. So let's make that point right there. Now we've created essentially a four-sided shape that we can draw in if we want to. We can erase these, of course, but this gives us this box within this picture, so we know that our elephant is going to be big enough if we're staying relatively inside this box with our shape. Now, of course, the hip of this elephant comes out past this line. If this was a straight line, the hip's coming out past. But that's like adding this in, it will be our next step. And as we do this, we getting more and more detailed with our work. A lot of times students will, when they're asked to draw something, very quickly they start to work on the details because they think that is the most important part. It's not. The details come last. If you can keep reminding yourself that the details should come last, you will eventually train yourself to go through a process of drawing so that your overall drawing will be much, much better. Your shapes and your proportions will be more accurate. So then the details will actually come last to basically just give it that finishing touch that you're looking for. Again, depending on the level of detail you want to get. But your detail, regardless of how detailed you can be, it doesn't matter unless your shape and your proportions are accurate. Because even if you're the best detail drawer in the world, without the proper shape and proportions, it's still going to look amateur. So that's what we're going to try to avoid here now, okay? So the next step that we're going to get into from here is a step that we call blocking in, okay? And essentially we're going to start at one of these points. I'll start at the top point, and we're going to do this process by working around to get the outside contour of the shape of this elephant, okay? Now before I start on here, I just want to show you something quickly. Here is a very simple mountain, okay? It's got a very simple peak. We can see that. Peaks at the very top of the peak, we can call this the apex or the top or the summit. These ones are very, very obvious, right? Now, if you have a mountain that looks like this, it's more of a big curve. It's still a mountain. It's a little bit more difficult, but somewhere at the top, there's going to be an apex, a summit, okay? Now, if your mountain is really, really low sloping like this, there is a curved line. It's a very short mountain. It will still have an apex. It will have a summit somewhere in the middle, and you can mark that off, okay? So these different shapes of mountains, essentially different types of curves, that's what we're looking for on this stage, and that's what you want to train yourself to do, is to identify parts of the picture that have angles like this and different types of curves. And when you see those curves, find the middle and add a dot, okay? That's how we're going to build our dot to dot, which is what I said that we're going to do here. So this is our stage that we call blocking in, okay? So we're going to start up here. Now the key to this is, of course, being able to see and recognize the lines in the picture itself, okay? So we're going to start up here. There's lots of little tiny lines, but let's try to simplify things off the start, because the little tiny curves and changes we can do later, because those are details, and I said details can come last, okay? So if we start here, if our destination is down here, we have this whole big long line right here, and of course this is a curve, so this is our mountain. We're looking for the apex of the mountain, the summit of the mountain, which is probably around there, where the hip starts to curve like this, okay? And suddenly we have the starting of our dot to dot. And we're going to continue working around like this. This line here is fairly straight, so let's just leave this right here. Now this is the ankle, it's not the flat part of the foot, so we need to come down here. Now the heel is going to give us an angle like this. Again, that's a little mountain. The toes like this, it's a little mountain. Here's a curve, so there's going to be a middle of the mountain up there, the top of the mountain, okay? Then right here, we've got more of a steeper peak on this mountain, so we'll mark that off. This is fairly straight. We won't worry about this right now, but we get to this heel again. That is a peak. The front toe gives us an angle. That's a peak. Here's more of a defined curve, so let's mark this off. Where's our middle? Probably there. Here's a peak as well. Here's another peak as well. We've got a curve coming down here. Let's mark this one off here. And we got these peaks down by the feet. This is fairly straight. Comes up to this part here, which is another very sharp peak there. Here's a little tiny curve coming here, if you can see. So we'll mark that off. This is a more rounded curve. We'll mark off the middle of that steepest part of the curve. And again, we'll just do this to work our way around. Everywhere you see a curve, mark it off. Now from here to here, it's tricky with the tusk and the trunk in the way, so we're just going to ignore that. We'll add it later because those are details. We want the main shape first. So this is actually one big line here, you can see. Okay, so of course, if this is one big line, the middle is going to be that. The middle of our mountain, the peak, is going to be right there. Okay, now we're kind of back up to here. Here's another curve. There's kind of a steepest part of the curve would be here. This looks like a straight line, but it does sort of dip a little bit down here if we're going from this spot to this spot. It does curve very slightly, so let's make another point right there. Again, I didn't do any of the points inside. I didn't do any of the lines inside. We'll save that till later because I'm just trying to do the outside shape. Okay, so now the way we transfer to this is kind of neat. It involves lines and angles. If you have 2 points, you can figure out if you have you can figure out what your angle is. And we can use that to transfer this over. And I'll show you what I mean in a second here, okay? So let's start with our point here. And let's work our way around the hip and come around the rest of the shape of this elephant, okay? From this point here to this point here, we don't have this point mapped out on our grid yet. That's what we're trying to do. And to find that, what I want you to do is put your pencil, you have to line up your paper. This is your page straight up and down. Make sure that your paper is lined up straight and down, up and down as well. Use your pencil, line your paper from one point to the other, line your pencil up, and it gives you the angle, okay? Now, if you transfer very carefully that angle up to here like that without moving your pencil very much, if you can hold your pencil nice and straight, slowly push it up to get that same angle, and then very quickly draw that angle on, your angle from here to here should be pretty close, okay? Now, how far do we need to get to this point? Well, this is our destination. We want to mark that off too. We can do that. Okay, it's over, should be over just a little bit. We know that it's going to be on this line somewhere, but how far are we going to go? Well, we have our reference points along the sides that we can use. Okay, so this is coming over this far, and it's just down below the point here. So we bring this across. So probably maybe around there. Actually, maybe down even just a little bit further. Will be accurate. Again, we're just trying to get as close as we can. Okay, from here to here, now we're going to go down here. Now we can basically just draw a straight line that goes from here, but to check to make sure you're right, hold your pencil up right there, bring it down to match it down there. If those are pretty darn close, then you're in good shape. Okay, Now we're at this is our furthest point out, but we're not quite at the bottom of the foot, don't forget. This is just the ankle. So again, this needs to come down on a bit of an angle there. How do we know where this point is? Well, again, we just use, okay, so we're coming over this far, we're going up this far. So we should be kind of around there. Okay? Maybe up a little bit. Anyway, we're trying to get close. It is standing on a flat ground, so we can be fairly flat coming across. From here, how far do we need to get to? Well, this is our point almost directly between these two points up here, halfway between these two, the quarter point and the halfway point. So if we bring this up, the front part of our toe is going to be about there. Okay? So it's a little bit tedious, but it will save you a ton of time along the way to sort of work yourself around the outside of this shape. And we sort of continue doing that. So if we're trying to work our way back up, again, we're going from the crease of the ankle, from the toes. We're going to follow it up like that. How far do we need to go? Down between these parts, so probably about there. And then we continue on developing our angles. And how far does that go? About there. In construction, the old pointer of measure twice, cut once. It applies here. Okay. Now you'll probably look at this and say, "Oh, Mr. Andrew, this leg is way too big. Like it's too thick compared to this." But that is because we're just using our basic shapes. Remember, the details will come later. I realize that this is curved here. Okay, so what we're going to do later is essentially curve this out. That will come later, but I will just show you that now. Similar to this way, there is a very slight curve here. So this is coming down straight. This will sort of curve out eventually. Okay, but we're trying to get our basic shape first. Okay, so I'm going to go and finish this off very quickly. I want you to follow along and try with whatever drawing that you are working on right now, and I'm going to sort of try to get through this fairly quickly. The more you practice this, certainly the faster you will get. Just like any other skill, as you're going, try to make sure that your legs are relatively the same thickness. Now, my point here is maybe over a little bit. Again, you can make these adjustments as you go. And these probably need to come down a little bit also. This one needs to come down a little bit. But originally we were just trying to get close. And in the grand scheme of things, we're getting fairly close here. So in terms of our general shape, and that's what we want. That angle's a little bit low, so I can fix that by coming up here. Now we have the general basic shape for this elephant. And now when we go to start to get into the other parts, this should maybe be a little bit lower. We can go around, actually before we move on to the next step, we can go around and check and make sure our basic shape is a little bit more, correct than we hope. So I can prove this ear should be a little bit higher, so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just moving that up a little bit to make sure that this one is higher than this one. But generally our basic shape, we don't have our trunk, we're going to add that later, but the basic shape we do have. Now, one way for a picture like this, so again, we're trying to check lines and make sure our lines is right. If we follow this line here up the belly and up the chest, it almost forms a complete line with the ear, even though it tucks in behind that front leg. It does kind of curve a little bit like this, but if you can put along the base, you can put your ruler there and bring it up, and if you're relatively close, then you know that the legs are generally the right height, and the body itself is close to the right height. Now to move into the middle part of the picture, to get the interior lines, what you want to do for that is to, again, look for main lines in this picture. Okay, so the main line for here, the most obvious one in this area is certainly this, the big part of the ear right here. This comes down like this. If this line were to continue, it would actually intersect with the line that you've already made. So let's find where this point is. Okay, so if this is halfway, and we find halfway over here, it's probably about right there. Okay, we line up our pencil for the angle, bring that over, bring something down like this. Okay, now we're starting to roll. And again, I realize that this curves, and later on, we can make this curve as we add details. I'll just show you that now, but we will add details a little bit later on. Okay. This here, this kind of becomes one big long line too. So if you can, it does sort of curve a little bit, but you can extend this up like that. This kind of curves like this. There's kind of a point there. So if you can find out where that's going to be and do the same thing. This comes across like this, fairly straight. You can just follow that for now. Again, we can add those details later. I realize we don't have the trunk yet, but it's a difficult part and we'll add it later. Now, the face, we do have this middle point, which is actually the very top of this elephant's head. Now, to figure out the shape of this, we're actually going to come down. Well, first of all, we're going to figure out where our curves are. So there's a curve. Here's an obvious line that has a curve right here. Here's an obvious line that has a curve right here. This curve goes the other way, so we can mark that off. This curve also goes the other way. And then sort of work continues on. But from here to here and here to here, those form almost straight lines that we can mark off. Whoops, so let's try to figure this out. So if we have this angle here, we bring it up like that. Same like this, we'll bring it over like that. Now figure out how far we need to go with these points, which is the brow ridge of the elephant. Again, we look at our reference points. Where are we on this page? Well, we're past the quarter point here, and we're up from this quarter point here. So if we bring this over, we come probably to about there. That's essentially going to be what will be our sort of brow ridge. This elephant, the brow ridge on the other side is pretty close to the same spot. Again, we're over. So we can do that. Now, to come back in, again, we're doing the same thing. We're finding those angles and so on. Again, the trick is to be able to see the lines here. If you want to do the trunk, very much how kind of like for people, our noses kind of creates this line up to the corner of their eyes. It's the same thing. You can draw this right on. You can actually see that line there. So if this is our sort of, eyebrow ridge in this area up here, we can come up a little bit higher where we would need to start and in a little bit. Again, using your reference points to sort of judge. Come out a little bit. This one's going to come out a little bit too. And figure out what that angle is. Okay, write that and draw that in. Okay, now this, of course, is going to curve. Makes it tricky because you could either, if this is a curve here, you can mark this off. There's another kind of forms these curves along the way. Again, you could, somebody who's really good at this and has had lots of practice will create lots of little points and sort of measure them all the way along the way. But in terms of where the trunk will curve, you can also figure out how the distance is close to this other leg. So it's going to need to come in nice and close for that. And then where's it going to bend? Well, you can imagine that kind of in relation to where it is on this leg. It's going to sort of come across here like that as well. Okay. So we can do that. Again, we're at the point now where we're adding details. Here's another line here. These lines that you can use to sort of develop the basic shape of this thing along the way, and you can continue on with that. Another key part, which is something I'll sort of finish off with today, actually two more things. Just very quickly, after I get to a point where I'm have my basic shape figured out, the next thing I will do is sort of just almost like creating jigsaw puzzles out of this. I will take sections of this and start to shade them out so I remember that they're darker, so that I remember when I add more detail that I need to be using darker colors. Okay, so for example, under here, this leg is clearly darker because if the sun is shining on its back, the belly and the body is casting shadow down underneath. So this area here, I'm just going to shade this in so I can remember. Here's a part here. Again, just going to take this, sort of shade it all in like this. This part here. These areas that are much darker. Under here, almost coming all the way down. It's darker sort of on the inside like this. Like that. Here it's actually darker kind of on the front side of the elephant. Just the way the shadows are casting. And right away you can see that this thing now already has some dimension to it. There's areas that are darker than others by using these lines, what we call hatching. So it starts to give it that 3D dimension. Up here, there's certainly some darker areas up here. So again, you can put your hatch lines in there. There's lots of little ripples in this picture you can see. Depends just how detailed that you want to get for doing this kind of thing. Detail, of course, will come in with stuff like this. So that's sort of a next step that you can do. Again, you can erase this stuff as you add more detail, but what you're trying to do is bring out the shapes of the darker areas so that you know which areas are supposed to be darker and to make the whole thing look more 3D. Now, the last thing I'll mention as one of the basics is a common mistake that a lot of us make, and that is, right now we have this elephant on this paper. And a lot of students will say, okay, I think I'm done. And my quote to them will be, well, is your elephant, for example, are they floating in space? Because if you don't have any ground or any sort of background or anything, no horizon, your object will look like it's floating in space. The space meaning your paper, it's just floating there. There's nothing to sort of keep it grounded in a sense. So that it just looks a little bit amateur. So, clearly it's standing on some sort of ground, so you can put a ground like that. Even that helps. But when we look at something, it's just the reality of nature. Here we do have, in the background, we do have a horizon. We actually have a few horizon lines here that we can choose from. And if we put them on here, again, let's take this one, for example. It's going to, again, meet just above our halfway point here. The other side is going to be doing the same thing over here. And if we roughly connect them like this, again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we're just trying to connect them. Now we can see that our elephant is not floating in space, and it looks much more realistic in terms of to make sure that it's not floating in space. But this is sort of the key parts of trying and practicing. It's not something that students are used to until they're specifically taught and shown how to do this. So I would strongly suggest that you try to work on sort of making this a habit, because it will, over time, and your ability to do this will be quite good in a very short period of time. And you'll be surprised how quickly you'll be able to draw things in a very realistic sense in a shorter period of time. This, when you move towards details, going to this point, doing this first, will give you confidence, knowing that your shape and your page and your proportions are accurate, so that you can concentrate more time on the details. You don't have to get halfway and think, oh, it just doesn't look right because it's not the right shape. Your shape and your proportions will be accurate, and you'll be able to move forward with confidence with your details and your shading. Okay, so that's what I'd like to see you practice for now, and then we'll get into more details later through the semester. Okay, thanks. Good luck.